My name is Diana. I am 33 years old, and I used to think my time as a military intelligence officer taught me everything about surviving behind enemy lines. I was wrong. The most dangerous enemy was sitting right at my parents' dining table. Last month, my parents kicked my 6-year-old daughter out into a Category 3 storm because of a vicious lie told by her pampered cousin. My father actually yelled at my little girl to get out screaming that he did not need a lying granddaughter in his pristine house. 6 hours later, the local police called me with news that made my blood run cold. 3 hours after that call, I was sitting perfectly still in a hospital emergency room. When my father finally casually walked in and saw me sitting by the bed, his face completely drained of blood and his hands would not stop shaking. "You cannot be here," he stammered, stepping backward. "How did you get her?" What he did not realize was that I had already initiated a tactical response that would systematically dismantle his entire life, his finances, and his fake reputation. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to use your own strength to protect your children from toxic relatives who thought you were weak. I was 3 states away, managing a high-stakes corporate security detail when my encrypted phone buzzed. It was a direct line from Officer Bennett back in my hometown. His voice was grim as he delivered the sitrep. Lily had been found unconscious on a flooded sidewalk, suffering from severe hypothermia in the middle of a freezing torrential downpour. I did not scream. I did not cry. My military training instantly kicked in, shutting down panic and replacing it with cold, calculating precision. I looked at my billionaire client, told him there was a family medical emergency, and informed him I was commandeering his private helicopter sitting on the roof. He took one look at my eyes and nodded, telling his pilot to get me absolutely anywhere I needed to go immediately. The flight back was a blur of turbulent gray skies and deafening rotor blades. While in the air, I pulled up my remote servers, mentally cataloging every asset, every camera, and every piece of leverage I had back home. My family thought I was just a struggling veteran working a basic security guard job to make ends meet. They had absolutely no idea I owned an elite threat assessment firm and had limitless resources at my disposal. They genuinely thought they could abuse my daughter and just sweep it all under the rug before I could afford a commercial flight back to town. I landed on the hospital helipad just under 3 hours later. The freezing rain soaked right through my dark tactical uniform as I bypassed the main lobby and used my credentials to access the emergency ward directly. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I found Lily wrapped in thermal blankets hooked up to monitors, her tiny face pale and bruised. I stood by her bed perfectly still, absorbing the harsh details of her physical condition, like an active crime scene investigator looking for clues. Then the double doors swung wide open. My father Thomas strolled in holding a cup of premium coffee. He was wearing his expensive golf sweater, looking mildly inconvenienced rather than terrified for his granddaughter. He was definitely planning to sweet-talk the doctors, spin a fake story about a confused child wandering off, and handle the local police before I ever found out what really happened. He stopped dead in his tracks. The coffee cup slipped from his fingers, spilling brown liquid all over his expensive leather shoes. His jaw dropped as he stared at me standing there in my soaked combat boots and tactical gear. He started shaking visibly, realizing his entire plan was instantly destroyed. "Diana," he gasped, looking frantically between me and the busy hallway. "You cannot be here. You are supposed to be in Chicago. How did you get her so fast?" I stepped over the spilled coffee, slowly closing the distance between us until I was standing merely inches from his terrified face. I did not raise my voice or show any emotion. I kept my tone completely flat, entirely steady, and highly lethal. "You honestly thought a massive storm and a few state lines would keep me away from my daughter?" I said quietly, watching his eyes dart around the room in absolute panic. "Now you are going to explain to me exactly why my innocent 6-year-old child was found dying in the freezing rain at 10 o'clock at night. And Thomas, you need to choose your next words very carefully because they will entirely determine whether you walk out of this hospital a free man or in steel handcuffs." Before my father could even piece together a coherent lie, heavy footsteps echoed from the corridor. The emergency room doors swung open again, and my older sister Amber marched in, followed closely by her husband DeAndre. Amber was wearing designer activewear, looking like she had just stepped out of a luxury class, rather than rushing to a hospital. DeAndre loomed behind her in a tailored suit that was trying slightly too hard to command respect. Diana Amber sighed loudly, crossing her arms as if my presence was a massive inconvenience. "We told the nurses not to bother calling you. You always overreact. Lily is perfectly fine. She just threw a ridiculous tantrum and got herself into trouble." I kept my eyes locked on my father for a split second longer before slowly turning my head to look at my sister. I did not move from my position beside Lily's hospital bed. I let the silence stretch, forcing them to fill the uncomfortable void. DeAndre stepped forward, puffing out his chest to assert his authority. "Look, let us just cut the nonsense." DeAndre snapped his voice loud enough to make a passing nurse flinch. "Your kid is entirely out of control, Diana. Mason was just trying to play with her, and Lily shoved my 7-year-old son into a glass table. And worse, she stole from me. She took my $80,000 Patek Philippe watch right off the kitchen counter. We tore the house apart looking for it. She is a thief and a brat." Amber immediately nodded, placing a hand on her chest in a gesture of pure, fake sympathy. "It is true, Diana. I know your military background makes things hard for you. We all know you struggle with basic parenting. But you cannot let your kid run wild and assault her cousins." DeAndre was furious. My father, seemingly emboldened by their aggressive arrival, finally found his voice. "I was just doing what you clearly failed to do, Diana. I was teaching her a basic lesson in discipline. I put her out on the back porch to cool down and think about what she stole. It was only supposed to be for a minute. She is the one who decided to run off into the rain like a stray animal. If anyone is at fault here, it is you." I listened to their coordinated attack. An ordinary mother might have broken down sobbing or started screaming or desperately tried to defend her injured child. But I was not an ordinary mother. I was a trained intelligence operative, and I was actively scanning them for behavioral baselines and physical tells. I did not argue. I simply observed. First, I looked at my father. His breathing was shallow, his shoulders were hiked up toward his ears, and his eyes kept darting toward the door. He was lying about the timeline. You do not get severe hypothermia from stepping onto a porch for a single minute. Then I shifted my gaze to Amber. She was speaking with too much rehearsed confidence. Her hands were perfectly still, lacking the natural gestures of someone genuinely recounting a stressful event. She was reciting a script. Finally, my eyes landed on DeAndre. He was the most interesting target in the room. Despite his aggressive posturing and loud voice, a thick bead of sweat was actively rolling down his temple. The emergency room was heavily air-conditioned, yet he was perspiring heavily. He kept shifting his weight from his left foot to his right, but the most glaring inconsistency was resting right on his left wrist. He was claiming his $80,000 Patek Philippe had been stolen just a few hours ago. Yet tucked under the cuff of his expensive suit jacket, he was already wearing a replacement watch. I recognized the brand immediately. It was a cheap stainless steel knockoff you could buy at a mall kiosk. Why would a wealthy hedge fund manager have a cheap mall watch sitting around his house, ready to wear the exact same night his luxury piece was supposedly stolen? And more importantly, Lily was wearing a tight cotton dress today. It had absolutely no pockets. Where exactly would a 6-year-old child hide a heavy luxury watch? So she stole an $80,000 watch. I finally spoke, my voice deathly calm. "And your immediate response was to lock a small child outside in a Category 3 storm." DeAndre swallowed hard. "We are handling it internally," he snapped. "We do not need cops crawling around the house. Just pay me back for the watch, and we will forgive and forget." I stared at them, letting a cold smile touch the corners of my mouth. They did not just want to cover up their abuse. They were actually trying to extort me. Before I could deliver a verbal strike, the heavy emergency room doors pushed open once more. Dr. Foster walked in. He was a seasoned pediatrician with a completely no-nonsense demeanor. He carried a metal clipboard and wore an expression that instantly silenced the room. The false bravado radiating from my father evaporated under the doctor's intense glare. Dr. Foster stepped up to Lily's bed and gently adjusted her thermal blanket before turning his attention directly to me. "Are you the mother?" he asked with underlying concern. I nodded firmly, stepping closer to my daughter. "Your little girl is incredibly lucky." Dr. Foster began consulting his notes. "She is currently suffering from severe hypothermia. We are warming her up slowly with heated intravenous fluids, and she will need to stay here for observation, but she is going to survive." A sigh of fake relief came from Amber. "Thank goodness," Amber gasped, placing her hand over her heart in another theatrical display. "We were so worried about her." Dr. Foster ignored her completely. "The hypothermia is severe," he continued, his tone dropping an octave. "But that is not my primary concern right now. I need to ask you about the injury on her right arm." My father stepped forward immediately, his face flushing red. "Injury," he interrupted loudly. "Kids get hurt all the time. She's a clumsy kid. She probably bumped into the glass table earlier. I already told you she was throwing a violent tantrum." Dr. Foster slowly turned his head to look at my father. He pulled back the edge of the thermal blanket, exposing Lily's small, fragile shoulder and upper arm. Right there, stark against her pale skin, was a massive, angry purple bruise. It was not a scrape. It was not a bump from a fall. It was the distinct, undeniable shape of a large adult hand. You could clearly see the individual marks where fingers had dug brutally into her flesh, and a darker contusion where a thumb had pressed down hard. "That is not from a fall," Dr. Foster stated coldly. "That is a defensive grip injury. Someone grabbed this child with extreme force and dragged her. I am legally obligated as a medical professional to report this to the authorities immediately." My father's face flushed a furious crimson. "You will do absolutely no such thing," he barked, stepping right into the doctor's personal space. "Do you have any idea who you are talking to? I am Thomas. I am personal friends with the director of this hospital board. We play golf every Sunday. If you dare pick up a phone to file some ridiculous report over a misunderstood family discipline issue, I will have your medical license revoked before your shift even ends." Amber chimed in, stepping up beside our father. "He is right. You are completely overstepping your boundaries, doctor. This is a private family matter." While they were busy cornering the pediatrician trying to use their imaginary social status to bully a medical professional, my training took over completely. I did not engage in the shouting match. I assessed the evidence. I looked closely at the dark contusion on Lily's bruise. There was a specific indentation pattern there, a sharp metallic-looking imprint right in the center of the dark purple skin. I calmly turned my head to look at my father's hands as he aggressively pointed his finger at Dr. Foster. On his right hand, sitting heavy and prominent, was his massive gold college class ring. The shape of the stone setting perfectly matched the deep indentation on my daughter's arm. I smoothly reached into my tactical vest pocket and withdrew my encrypted phone. I kept my movements small and entirely unnoticeable, a technique drilled into me during covert surveillance operations. First, I snapped a high-resolution photograph of the bruise on Lily's arm, making sure the lighting clearly highlighted the ring imprint. Then I slightly shifted my angle. As my father continued to wave his hands and yell threats at the doctor, I captured 3 perfectly clear frames of his right hand, making sure the gold college ring was in sharp focus. I opened my highly secure encrypted messaging app on my phone and slowly attached the files. I sent them directly to Donovan, my absolutely ruthless financial and family attorney back in the city. I added a single cold line of text to the message. "Preserve these images for immediate assault and battery charges, and prepare to destroy them all." I silently slid the device back into my dark tactical pocket, my expression never changing. The trap was now officially and securely set. Now I just had to wait for them to confidently take their next foolish step into the absolute destruction I was already preparing for them. I slipped my encrypted phone back into my tactical vest, keeping my face a perfect mask of absolute calm. Dr. Foster was still engaged in a heated standoff with my father across the room, firmly explaining that standard medical protocols could not be bypassed by a country club membership. I tuned out my father's blustering voice and turned my attention back to Lily. She was awake now, her small eyes looking around the chaotic room with deep exhaustion. I gently wrapped her securely in the thick hospital thermal blanket, lifting her small, trembling body against my chest. She buried her face into the collar of my damp uniform, and I felt a massive surge of protective instinct. I grabbed her wet clothes, shoved them forcefully into my tactical go bag, and turned toward the door to leave. That is exactly when DeAndre stepped directly into my path. He crossed his arms over his chest, trying to physically block the exit of the emergency room. His fake confidence had suddenly returned now that Dr. Foster was distracted. "You are not taking her anywhere, Diana." DeAndre sneered, looking down his nose at me with a look of pure disgust. "You do not just get to walk away from an $80,000 theft. If you try to leave this hospital without writing me a check or handing over the keys to whatever rusty car you drive, I am making a phone call right now." I stared directly at his chest, noting the rapid rise and fall of his breathing. "I am calling Child Protective Services." He threatened, his voice echoing slightly in the sterile room. "I will tell them exactly what you are. You are an unstable combat veteran with severe PTSD who cannot even control her violent child. I will tell them you neglect her, that you leave her completely alone to go work." Your pathetic security guard shifts. With my income bracket, my zip code, and my social connections, who do you honestly think they are going to believe? A highly successful hedge fund manager, or a broken, traumatized soldier living paycheck to paycheck? They will take her away from you before the weekend is even over. Right on cue, my mother, Catherine, hurried into the hospital room. She had been waiting out in the hallway, trying to avoid the messy reality of the emergency ward. She smoothed down her pristine cashmere sweater and looked at me with an expression of pure annoyance, as if my daughter, almost freezing to death, was just a personal inconvenience to her social calendar. "Diana, please just stop being so incredibly difficult." Catherine sighed heavily, stepping up to stand beside DeAndre. "Your sister Amber is already stressed enough. DeAndre is a very generous man. He is willing to completely overlook Lily stealing his watch if you just show some basic respect. Just apologize to him right now. Apologize to your father. Write DeAndre a promissory note, and we can all just move on from this unfortunate misunderstanding. Family is about forgiveness, Diana." The sheer audacity of her words hung heavily in the freezing air of the room. My mother was standing right next to a bed where her granddaughter had just been treated for severe hypothermia, and she was demanding that I apologize to the man whose son caused the entire situation. I adjusted Lily's weight in my arms, making sure her bruised shoulder was protected. I did not yell. Arguing with narcissists is a massive tactical error that only drains your energy and feeds their fragile egos. Instead, I looked directly into DeAndre's eyes, bypassing my mother entirely. "You should absolutely call Child Protective Services. DeAndre," I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper that made the arrogant smirk vanish instantly from his face. "In fact, I highly encourage you to make that call tonight. Because when a federal agency opens an official investigation, they do not just look at my house. They look at the accuser. They look at your household environment, your hidden financial stability, your undisclosed debts, and exactly how you fund your flashy lifestyle." I stepped closer, forcing him to instinctively take a step back out of my way. "If I were you, I would pray to whatever God you believe in that Child Protective Services never looks inside your house." I did not wait for his response. I walked right past him out the sliding doors. I ignored my father yelling something completely incoherent behind me. The electronic doors of the emergency room slid open, and I walked out into the cold night air, ready for the war they just started. The sun was barely rising over the tree line when the heavy iron gates of my private residence registered a visitor. After leaving the hospital, I had brought Lily straight to my highly secure four-bedroom property, tucked away in the dense woods just outside the city limits. She was currently sleeping deeply in her custom-built bedroom, warm and entirely safe, under the watchful eyes of my elite security systems. I was standing in my kitchen, sipping black coffee, and reviewing the encrypted files Attorney Donovan had sent over during the night when the front gate intercom buzzed loudly. I pulled up the exterior camera feed on my tablet. A mid-sized sedan was idling at the gate. A woman in a cheap blazer and carrying a thick clipboard was aggressively pressing the buzzer. I recognized the bureaucratic posture immediately. DeAndre had actually made good on his cowardly threat. He and my sister Amber had weaponized Child Protective Services against me in less than 12 hours. I pressed the gate release button and calmly walked to the front foyer. I was dressed in a pristine white button-down shirt and tailored slacks, looking every inch the high-level executive. When I opened my heavy oak front door, the woman was already marching up the driveway, her face set in a mask of stern bureaucratic authority. "Are you Diana?" she asked sharply, not even waiting for me to fully open the door. "I am Agent Reynolds with State Child Protective Services. We received a highly credible emergency tip early this morning. I need to come inside your home immediately, and I need direct access to your 6-year-old daughter, Lily. The report states she is in immediate danger from a violent combat veteran suffering from severe psychological trauma." I did not blink. I did not step aside. I simply looked at her clipboard and then directly into her eyes. "Good morning, Agent Reynolds," I said, my voice smooth and completely devoid of anxiety. "You may certainly come inside. However, you will lower your voice immediately. My daughter is recovering from a severe medical trauma inflicted by the very people who called you, and if you wake her up, our interaction will end instantly. Follow me to the formal living room." She looked momentarily thrown by my absolute lack of panic. Most people facing a surprise raid panicked. I was simply directing her like a subordinate. She followed me inside, her eyes darting around the immaculate, professionally designed interior of my home. It clearly did not match the narrative of a chaotic, broken veteran she had been fed. "Sit down," I instructed, pointing to the leather sofa. She hesitated but sat. "Now, Agent Reynolds, you received an anonymous tip claiming I am a violently unstable veteran who neglects her child. I assume the caller used the word dangerous." She gripped her clipboard tightly. "I cannot disclose the details of the caller, Diana, but the allegations are severe. I need to evaluate your mental state and inspect the living conditions of the child. If you do not cooperate, I have the authority to return with police officers." I placed my coffee cup on the glass table and picked up a thick, leather-bound dossier I had prepared hours ago. I slid it across the table toward her. "You do not need to call the police," I replied calmly. "You just need to read. Open it." Agent Reynolds frowned. Opening the folder. On the very first page was my most recent psychological evaluation from the Department of Defense. It was dated less than 3 months ago. The second page was an independent psychiatric clearance from a private medical board, ranking my mental stability in the top 1% of elite security contractors. The third document was a signed certificate of my active top-secret security clearance, which required a background check so rigorous that even a parking ticket had to be justified. "These are federal documents," Agent Reynolds murmured, her eyes scanning the official government seals and signatures. She looked up at me, her aggressive demeanor rapidly dissolving into deep confusion. "You are a civilian security consultant. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Aegis Security Solutions." I corrected her very gently. "My firm protects visiting diplomats, crucial federal witnesses, and wealthy billionaire executives. My psychological profile is scrutinized by federal agencies twice a year. If I had even a hint of untreated trauma or violent instability, I would lose contracts worth tens of millions of dollars. The people who called you this morning are not concerned citizens. They are desperate individuals attempting to use a state agency to harass me and cover up their own felony child abuse." Agent Reynolds closed the heavy folder tightly, realizing the massive extent of her mistake now. "I am not finished yet, Agent Reynolds," I said smoothly, taking the folder back from her hands. "You came here to investigate allegations of an unsafe household environment. I am going to give you exactly what you came for, but I require you to document every single thing I am about to show you." I picked up a sleek remote control from the glass coffee table and pressed a single button. The large abstract painting on the far wall of my formal living room silently slid upward, revealing a massive high-definition smart screen. My property is equipped with a military-grade 360-degree surveillance network. It records high-resolution video and audio in every single room and covers every square inch of the exterior grounds. I tapped a few commands into my tablet, syncing it to the display. The screen flickered to life, showing a split grid of various rooms. I pulled up a specific archived file from 2 weeks ago when my sister Amber and her husband DeAndre brought their son Mason over for a family dinner. Watch the screen closely, I instructed. The video enlarged to show my sunroom. 7-year-old Mason was violently kicking a wooden decorative table while Amber sat on the sofa just scrolling through her phone, completely ignoring him. Then the footage showed my 6-year-old daughter Lily quietly building a puzzle on the rug. Without any warning, Mason grabbed a heavy metal toy truck and hurled it directly at Lily, hitting her hard in the shoulder. Lily cried out and curled into a ball. What did my sister do in response? On the screen, Amber finally looked up, laughed lightly, and told Mason he had a good throwing arm before going back to her phone. Agent Reynolds gasped quietly, her pen hovering over her official clipboard. Now, I said, switching to another archived clip from a month prior. Watch Mason in my backyard. The screen showed the boy maliciously chasing my golden retriever, cornering the poor dog and striking it with a plastic baseball bat. DeAndre was standing right there drinking a premium beer. Instead of stopping his son, DeAndre actually cheered and told Mason to show him his batting stance. I paused the video and turned back to the state agent. Now let us look at the child they claimed as violent and out of control. I pulled up dozens of short clips of Lily, gently feeding the neighborhood birds, helping me plant flowers in the garden, and sitting quietly on her bedroom floor, reading a book to her stuffed animals. She is a gentle, empathetic girl who was brutally attacked last night by the very people who filed this fake report against me. Agent Reynolds aggressively wrote on her official forms, her face flushed with professional outrage. I am so terribly sorry for this ridiculous intrusion, Diana, she said, her voice changing from authoritative to deeply apologetic. I have seen absolutely more than enough. It is abundantly clear that the individuals who called our hotlines were projecting the violent behavior of their own child onto yours. She clicked her pen shut and looked me directly in the eye. I am officially closing this investigation right now. I am marking this tip as malicious and false in our database. Furthermore, I am going to flag their phone number. If they ever attempt to weaponize state agencies against you again, they will face severe legal consequences for filing a false emergency report. Thank you, Agent Reynolds, I said, standing up and gesturing toward the front door. I will make sure you receive the hospital records regarding her actual injuries later today. I walked her back to the foyer, maintaining my perfectly calm and collected executive persona. She shook my hand with genuine respect before hurrying down the driveway and driving away. I closed the heavy oak door and locked the deadbolt. The house was completely silent again. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the adrenaline of the morning finally settle. I had easily neutralized their first attack using pure logic and undeniable evidence. My family was playing a petty emotional game, but I was fighting a highly tactical war. I turned to head toward the kitchen to pour myself a fresh cup of hot black coffee when my encrypted phone suddenly vibrated deep inside my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was not a message from my lawyer. It was an automated alert from my primary banking application. The bold red text on the screen indicated that a routine school purchase had bounced. I tapped the notification to see the full details. Every single personal credit card linked to my name had just been very aggressively declined and locked. I stared down at the glowing screen of my encrypted phone, watching the red notification flash across the banking application. Every single personal credit card linked to my name under the original family trust had just been aggressively declined and subsequently locked. I did not feel a sudden rush of panic or a sinking feeling in my chest. Instead, I felt a profound sense of tactical amusement. My father had finally made his move. Before the screen could even dim, my phone began to vibrate violently in my hand. The caller ID flashed with my father, Thomas. I walked over to the kitchen island, set my coffee mug down, and slowly swiped to answer the call. I did not say a word. I simply placed the phone to my ear and waited for him to initiate the engagement. Did you honestly think you could just walk away from us last night? Diana? His voice boomed through the speaker, dripping with a toxic mixture of arrogant satisfaction. I warned you not to disrespect this family and DeAndre. I just got off the phone with the wealth management office. I completely froze every single credit card attached to your name from the family trust. Let us see exactly how long you can maintain your arrogant attitude when you cannot even buy groceries to feed your kid. I leaned against the cool marble of the kitchen counter and took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee. I let the silence stretch over the secure line, forcing him to sit in the awkward tension. Are you quite finished, Thomas? I finally asked, my tone completely flat. Not even close, he snapped, his voice rising another octave. You are going to pack Lily into whatever cheap, rusty car you drive and bring her directly to Amber's house right now. You are both going to march up to their front door and formally apologize to DeAndre for stealing his luxury watch. Then you are going to sit down and sign a legally binding promissory note for the $80,000. If you do exactly as I say and show genuine remorse, I might consider unfreezing your grocery allowance. If you refuse, you are cut off forever. Good luck surviving on a pathetic veteran's pension in this brutal economy. I could not help it. A short, cold laugh escaped my lips, echoing sharply in the quiet stillness of my kitchen. It was a genuine laugh of pure, unadulterated amusement. My father went completely silent on the other end of the line, entirely confused by my reaction. He had expected begging. He had expected me to completely surrender to his financial authority. You think total financial ruin is a joke, Diana? He demanded, his voice trembling with sudden volatile anger. I think your profound ignorance is a massive joke, Thomas, I replied smoothly, my voice dropping into a lethal calm. You are sitting in your sprawling mansion, trying to leverage a bank account I have not touched in 6 entire years. Let me refresh your memory, since you seem to be suffering from severe selective amnesia this morning. 6 years ago, when I refused to give Lily up for adoption, you looked me directly in the eye and told me I would be begging on the streets without your family trust. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. So I stopped using it. I left the accounts active just to see exactly how long it would take you to eventually use them as a weapon against me. I have not spent a single dime of your money since the day Lily was born. The transaction that just declined was a $12 automated software subscription I forgot to migrate. You are lying, he barked, desperately, trying to regain control of the narrative. You are a low-level security guard. There is absolutely no way you are affording a life in this city without secretly dipping into the trust fund to pay your rent. You are bluffing to save face, and you are going to come crawling back to me by tomorrow morning when your refrigerator is completely empty. I smiled, letting him tightly cling to his pathetic delusion. My father had absolutely no idea that while he was busy funding DeAndre's flashy fake lifestyle, I was busy building Aegis security solutions from the ground up. He did not know my private firm held exclusive contracts with federal agencies and global tech executives. If you truly believe I am bluffing, Thomas, then I suppose we will just have to see who starves first, I said, keeping my voice entirely composed. But I will absolutely not be coming to Amber's house today to apologize to a man who wears fake watches while physically abusing children. You arrogant little brat, he shouted, the polished facade slipping away. I am giving you one final chance, Diana. We are having a formal family dinner this Sunday evening. You will show up, you will bring the child, and you will beg for forgiveness. If you do not walk through my front doors by 7 o'clock on Sunday, you are dead to me. You will get absolutely nothing from my estate. Do you understand me? I looked at the thick leather dossier sitting on my glass coffee table and thought about the criminal financial documents my attorney was already preparing to file. Oh, I understand perfectly, Thomas, I replied softly. I will see you on Sunday. I ended the call and placed the encrypted phone down on the cold marble counter. Sunday evening was exactly 48 hours away. That gave me more than enough time to complete my intelligence gathering and prepare the absolute destruction of their lives. I walked out of the kitchen and headed straight down the hallway to my private home office. This was not a standard corporate workspace. It was a highly secure command center, equipped with multi-screen processing units and direct links to proprietary global databases. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and woke up the primary monitors. My first objective was to find out exactly what happened on that front porch. Thomas claimed Lily ran away after being disciplined. Amber and DeAndre claimed she stole an $80,000 watch. I knew they were all lying, but in my line of work, knowing the truth is completely useless unless you can unequivocally prove it in a court of law. I pulled up the geographical mapping software and entered my parents' residential address. They lived in an exclusive gated community filled with wealthy executives who loved buying expensive smart home technology, but rarely understood how to properly secure it. I ran a passive sweep of the local wireless networks, bouncing my signal through 3 different proxy servers to mask my physical location. Within seconds, the screen populated with dozens of vulnerable access points. Unsecured smart refrigerators, wireless security cameras, with default factory passwords, and connected vehicles were everywhere. My eyes scanned the data packets until I found exactly what I was looking for. A neighbor living directly across the street from my parents' house owned a brand new Tesla Model S. Those vehicles are essentially rolling surveillance stations equipped with advanced cameras that constantly record high-definition video of their immediate surroundings. I isolated the neighbor's weak home network, bypassed their laughable router security in under 2 minutes, and accessed the local cloud storage drive, where the vehicle backed up its daily video logs. I quickly downloaded the encrypted video files from the previous evening and ran them through my decryption software. I pulled up the primary forward-facing camera angle, which pointed directly at my parents' sprawling front lawn and driveway. The timestamp on the bottom corner showed 8:15 at night. The storm was just beginning to pick up, dropping heavy sheets of freezing rain. I scrubbed forward through the footage, keeping my eyes completely focused on the front door. At exactly 8:22, the heavy mahogany front door swung open. 7-year-old Mason came running out onto the covered porch. He was throwing a massive temper tantrum, stomping his feet and screaming at the top of his lungs, and tightly clutched in his right hand was a heavy silver object that caught the dim porch light. It was DeAndre's luxury watch. I watched in absolute disgust as Mason marched directly to the edge of the driveway and deliberately threw the expensive timepiece straight down the metal storm drain. Less than 2 minutes later, my father Thomas stepped out onto the porch. He looked furious. He grabbed Mason by the shoulders and shook him, asking him a direct question. Mason immediately pointed his finger down at the storm drain. I could clearly see the sheer panic wash over my father's face even through the grainy rain. He knew DeAndre owed dangerous people money, and that watch was likely insured or collateral. Instead of holding his precious grandson accountable, Thomas made a deeply calculated and purely evil decision. He shoved Mason back inside the house. A few moments later, the front door opened again. This time, Thomas was violently dragging my tiny 6-year-old daughter by her right arm. The high-definition camera captured the exact moment his heavy gold college ring dug brutally into her fragile skin, creating the massive purple bruise I saw at the hospital. Lily was crying desperately, trying to pull away. Thomas shoved her hard out into the freezing torrential rain and slammed the heavy door, completely shutting her out in the dark. I watched Lily stumble in the freezing rain, her thin cotton dress instantly soaked through. She knocked on the heavy wooden door for several minutes before finally wandering down the driveway in a desperate search for shelter. My father never came back out to check on her. He left her out there to freeze while he sat inside his warm, affluent mansion crafting a lie with Amber and DeAndre. I sat perfectly still in my dark office watching my father leave my child to die, simply to cover up a mistake made by his golden grandson. The cold fury inside my chest solidified into absolute ice. I did not shed a single tear. I calmly highlighted the video files and created 4 separate heavily encrypted backups, routing them to offshore servers. They thought they had successfully buried the truth, but they had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy them. I powered down my secure monitors and left my home office feeling absolute clarity. The adrenaline that kept me awake finally began to recede. I checked on Lily, watching her sleep peacefully in her bed before getting a few hours of tactical rest myself. When I woke up the next morning, the sun was shining, but my encrypted phone was vibrating constantly on the nightstand. It was a rapid succession of notifications overwhelming my home screen. I picked up the device and saw over 50 missed calls and hundreds of incoming text messages. They were not from my clients or my elite security team. They were from my extended family. Aunts, uncles, and distant cousins who had not spoken to me in years were suddenly flooding my personal inbox with pure venom. I opened the primary family group chat. The messages were toxic and coordinated. "How dare you do this to your own parents?" Read a text from Aunt Patricia. "You need serious psychiatric help. Diana wrote my cousin David. You are tearing this beautiful family apart out of pure jealousy and spite." I scrolled past the hateful messages and found the original source of the sudden outrage. Someone had shared a direct link to Amber's public social media profile. I clicked the link and watched as a high-definition video immediately started playing on my screen. There was my older sister Amber sitting on her expensive velvet sofa, wearing minimal makeup to look perfectly distressed. She was holding a crumpled tissue and staring directly into the camera lens with big, tear-filled eyes. "Hi, everyone," Amber began, her voice trembling with completely manufactured grief. "I usually keep my family life private, but I am heartbroken today. As many of you know, my younger sister is a military veteran. We have tried hard to support her through her severe trauma over the years. But last night, things took a terrifying turn. Her 6-year-old daughter, Lily, has become uncontrollable due to her chaotic upbringing. Lily violently assaulted my sweet son Mason and stole my husband's extremely valuable watch." Amber paused dramatically to wipe a perfectly timed fake tear from her cheek. When my loving father tried to calmly discipline her, Lily threw a massive tantrum and ran out into the dangerous storm. My father is completely devastated. We are all terrified for my sister and her troubled child. We tried to get her professional help, but she is just so unstable. Please keep our family in your prayers during this incredibly dark time. The video already had thousands of views and hundreds of comments from her wealthy suburban friends and our extended family network. They praised Amber for her bravery and compassion. They called me a broken soldier, a dangerous mother, and an ungrateful daughter. They labeled my innocent 6-year-old girl a violent delinquent. It was a calculated smear campaign designed to destroy my personal and professional reputation before I could tell the truth. Amber was using my honorable military service as a convenient weapon to paint me as a deranged lunatic. She was controlling the narrative to ensure that if I ever tried to report Thomas for child abuse, no one would ever believe me. A normal person would have panicked. A normal person would have commented on the video, desperately trying to defend themselves, or fired off angry text messages to the family members sending hateful threats. But I did not type a single reply. Engaging with a narcissist smear campaign publicly only gives the manipulator exactly what they want, which is attention, validation, and emotional chaos. Instead, I methodically initiated a hidden screen recording application on my phone. I captured Amber's entire fake crying video in high-definition audio and video. I scrolled slowly through the comment section, taking meticulous screenshots of every defamatory statement made by my sister and my extended family. I documented every hateful text message, every unhinged voicemail, and every physical threat sent to my personal device. I gathered the digital evidence with the cold, unfeeling precision of a forensic investigator. Once I had collected a massive file of undeniable cyber harassment, I opened my secure email server. I attached the video file and the dozens of screenshots into a new message addressed directly to Attorney Donovan. I typed a brief, highly specific directive. Amber just publicly accused me of being a violent, mentally unstable threat to society and falsely accused my child of grand larceny. She has incited our entire extended family to digitally harass me. Please immediately add severe defamation of character libel and coordinated cyber harassment to our growing list of civil lawsuits. Calculate the maximum financial damages for a security executive losing potential federal contracts due to public slander. I hit send and tossed the phone onto the bed. They thought they were winning a public relations war. They did not realize they were handing me a blank check. I left my secure home compound later that afternoon, making sure Lily was comfortably settled with her trusted nanny. I drove my dark, customized SUV straight into the heart of the downtown financial district. Attorney Donovan operated out of a sleek glass and steel high-rise that overlooked the entire city skyline. He was not just a family lawyer, he was a deeply ruthless corporate litigator who specialized in completely dismantling fraudulent financial structures. I bypassed the main reception desk and walked directly into his expansive corner office. Donovan was already standing by his massive mahogany desk reviewing the digital files I had transmitted earlier that morning. He did not offer a polite greeting. He simply tapped the printed photograph of Lily's bruised arm. "This assault and battery charge is completely airtight, Diana," he said, his voice a low, gravelly register. "I already sent the hospital records to the district attorney. Your father will be formally indicted for felony child endangerment before the end of the month. The defamation case against your sister is also moving forward. But we need to look at the larger tactical picture here." I sat down in the leather chair opposite his desk, crossing my legs and maintaining perfect posture. "I agree," I said firmly. "Thomas is arrogant, but he is also a coward. He would never physically assault a child just to cover up a minor property dispute involving a broken watch. There is a massive underlying reason why he is protecting DeAndre so desperately. He is terrified of him, or he is deeply financially entangled with him." Donovan nodded and turned his attention to his glowing dual monitors. "That is exactly what I suspected," he replied, typing rapidly on his mechanical keyboard. "I spent the last 3 hours running a deep background check on your brother-in-law. DeAndre presents himself as a highly successful hedge fund manager controlling millions of dollars in private wealth. But when you start digging past the expensive tailored suits and the luxury cars, his entire financial profile starts looking like a massive house of cards." Donovan pulled up a complex spreadsheet displaying various corporate entities and tax identification numbers. His primary investment firm is registered as a limited liability company in Delaware. But according to the federal databases I just accessed, his firm has not filed a single mandatory quarterly report with the Securities and Exchange Commission in over 12 entire months. I leaned forward, my analytical mind instantly recognizing the massive red flag. "You cannot legally operate a hedge fund in the United States without filing SEC disclosures," I stated, "unless you are intentionally hiding catastrophic financial losses or you are running an unregistered shadow fund." "Exactly," Donovan confirmed, tapping the screen emphatically. I dug deeper into his operational history. 2 years ago, DeAndre aggressively recruited several high-net-worth individuals from your father's affluent country club. He promised them guaranteed double-digit returns on experimental tech investments. For the first year, he actually paid out those returns, making him look like an absolute financial genius. But the math does not add up. The market sectors he claims to be investing in have been completely stagnant. I felt a cold realization settle into my chest. "He is running a Ponzi scheme," I concluded, my voice steady despite the massive implications. "He is using new investor money to pay off the older investors, creating the complete illusion of immense wealth and profitability." Donovan leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "That is the only logical conclusion, Diana. And it completely explains why your father is panicking. Thomas is the primary manager of your family trust. He was always incredibly proud of his financial acumen. If DeAndre convinced Thomas to secretly invest the entire family trust into this fraudulent hedge fund, then Thomas is facing total financial ruin if DeAndre goes down." "It also explains the ridiculous story about the stolen watch," I added, piecing the puzzle together. DeAndre is likely drowning in massive hidden debt. The fake luxury watch he is currently wearing proves he probably pawned the real one months ago to cover his tracks. He needed a convenient scapegoat to file a massive insurance claim. He decided to blame a 6-year-old child for stealing it, hoping to get a quick cash payout without triggering a police investigation. Donovan wrote down a series of quick notes on his legal pad. I will immediately file an anonymous whistleblower report directly to the SEC Enforcement Division. They will launch an aggressive audit of his firm within days. We are no longer just dealing with a toxic family dispute, Diana. We are now dealing with high-stakes, white-collar federal crime. I stood up from the leather chair, adjusting my tailored blazer. Do not file it anonymously, Donovan. File it using the corporate letterhead of Aegis Security Solutions. Let the federal investigators know exactly who provided the intelligence. I want DeAndre to know exactly who dismantled his entire pathetic life. He threatened to take my daughter away from me. I am going to ensure he spends the next 2 decades in a federal penitentiary. I left Donovan's office feeling a profound sense of tactical satisfaction. The pieces were moving exactly as I had positioned them. I drove back to the headquarters of Aegis Security Solutions, a highly secure, unmarked compound on the outskirts of the city. The exterior looked like a standard industrial warehouse, but the interior was a state-of-the-art fortress. I parked my SUV in my reserved spot and walked through the biometric security checkpoints. The atmosphere inside was focused and disciplined. My personnel, mostly former military and intelligence operatives, were quietly monitoring global threat feeds and managing high-stakes client logistics. I headed straight for my private office, ready to finalize the security protocols for a visiting diplomat. I had barely settled behind my desk when the internal comm system chirped. It was Reynolds, my head of physical security, a man who had completed multiple tours with Special Forces. Boss Reynolds, said, his voice completely devoid of alarm. We have a situation at the front gate. A man identifying himself as DeAndre is demanding to see you. He brought 2 very large individuals with him who appear to be acting as personal protection. They are currently attempting to intimidate the front desk staff and demanding immediate access. Should I have them physically removed from the premises? I leaned back in my chair, interlacing my fingers. The sheer audacity of DeAndre showing up at my heavily fortified headquarters with rented muscle was almost comical. No, Reynolds, I replied smoothly. Let them through the outer perimeter. Escort them directly to my office, but ensure they understand exactly whose territory they are walking into. Have Jackson and Miller flank them. A few minutes later, the heavy oak doors to my office swung open. DeAndre strutted in, trying to project an aura of immense wealth and untouchable power. He was flanked by 2 massive men wearing cheap, ill-fitting suits and dark sunglasses that looked entirely ridiculous indoors. They puffed out their chests, trying to look menacing. However, trailing right behind them were Jackson and Miller, 2 of my top operatives. My men were not bulky. They were lean, hyper-alert, and moved with lethal predatory grace. They seamlessly positioned themselves on either side of the door, completely blocking the exit. DeAndre stopped in front of my desk, his eyes darting nervously around the minimalist, highly secure office. "What is this place, Diana?" he sneered, trying to regain his manufactured bravado. "I thought you were just a glorified mall cop. This setup looks entirely ridiculous." I did not stand up. I did not offer him a seat. I simply looked at him, running a rapid, critical assessment of his appearance. "You are severely out of your depth, DeAndre." I said, my voice low and perfectly calm. "You brought 2 amateurs into a facility guarded by individuals who used to neutralize high-value targets for a living. If your rented muscle so much as twitches aggressively, Jackson and Miller will have them unconscious on the floor before you even blink." The 2 bodyguards stiffened suddenly, realizing they were completely outmatched. They subtly shifted their weight away from my operatives, their intimidating postures dissolving into obvious discomfort. DeAndre swallowed hard, clearly unnerved, but he pushed forward. "Listen to me very carefully, Diana." He began, pointing a finger at me. "I know you filed a formal complaint at the hospital. I know you are trying to stir up trouble with the local police. You need to drop it right now. You are causing unnecessary stress for Amber and your father. I am not going to let some bitter, struggling veteran ruin my family's reputation over a misunderstood discipline issue. I looked at his pointing finger, then slowly let my gaze drag down his entire outfit. I am not the one struggling, DeAndre, I stated coldly. You walked in here trying to project wealth, but your presentation is severely flawed. That tailored suit you are wearing is from 3 seasons ago. The fabric is starting to pill at the cuffs. And those shoes, I stared deliberately at his footwear. They are scuffed and desperately need a cobbler. A highly successful hedge fund manager controlling millions of dollars does not wear scuffed shoes to an intimidation meeting. You are putting on a pathetic show, DeAndre. You are broke. His face flushed a deep, angry crimson. You have absolutely no idea what you are talking about. He snapped, his voice cracking slightly. I control massive portfolios. I can ruin you with a single phone call. I can make sure you never find work in this city again. I smiled, a cold, empty expression. You cannot even afford to pay your own investors. DeAndre, I replied softly, watching the color completely drain from his face. I know about the unregistered Delaware LLC. I know you haven't filed SEC disclosures in over a year. I know your entire flashy life is built on a crumbling Ponzi scheme. And now you are desperately trying to cover up child abuse because you need my father's retirement money to keep the loan sharks away. DeAndre stumbled backward, looking as if I had physically struck him. His rented bodyguards looked incredibly confused, shifting nervously. You are completely insane, he whispered, completely losing his arrogant posture. I picked up a file folder from my desk and opened it. Get out of my building, DeAndre, I commanded, not looking up from the documents. And take your cheap muscle with you. I will see you at the family dinner on Sunday. Reynolds, escort these individuals off the property. If they resist, authorize physical force. Jackson and Miller stepped forward simultaneously. DeAndre didn't say another word. He turned and practically ran out of the office, his intimidating facade completely shattered, leaving the stench of pure desperation hanging in the air. I stood by the expansive glass window of my office, watching DeAndre and his rented muscles speed away from the compound perimeter in their luxury sedan. They looked exactly like frightened animals fleeing an apex predator. I returned to my desk and pulled up the finalized security blueprints for my upcoming diplomatic assignment. I needed absolute focus, but my encrypted phone vibrated again, disrupting the quiet efficiency of the room. The caller ID displayed my mother's name. Catherine rarely called me directly unless she needed to manipulate a situation that my father could not handle with brute force alone. I let it ring 3 times before swiping to answer the call. I did not offer a polite greeting. I just listened to the heavy, dramatic sigh echoing through the secure speaker. Diana, how could you be so incredibly cruel? She began, her voice trembling with perfectly rehearsed tears. DeAndre just called your father in an absolute panic. He said you humiliated him in front of his security personnel and threatened to destroy his entire business. Why are you doing this to us? Why are you deliberately trying to tear this beautiful family apart over a simple misunderstanding with your daughter? I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, keeping my breathing perfectly even. It was not a misunderstanding, Catherine, I replied coldly. Your husband abused my daughter. Your golden son-in-law filed a fraudulent emergency report with Child Protective Services to have my child taken away, and he is currently running a massive illegal financial operation. I am simply holding them accountable for their actions. My mother let out a sharp, desperate sob. You do not understand what is actually at stake here, Diana, she pleaded. You have to drop the hospital complaint right now. You have to call off whatever investigation you are starting. I remained completely silent, waiting for her to reveal her true motive. My mother never protected anyone unless her own personal comfort and social standing were directly threatened. Why do you care so much about DeAndre's fraudulent hedge fund, Catherine? I asked, pressing exactly on the exposed nerve. Because if his firm goes down, we lose absolutely everything, she cried, her voice cracking with genuine panic this time. The polished facade of the perfect suburban matriarch was finally shattering into pieces. Your father made a terrible mistake, Diana. 2 years ago, DeAndre convinced him that his new tech fund was going to double in value within 36 months. Thomas wanted to be the primary anchor investor to boost his own ego, but the family trust did not have enough liquid cash available. So without telling me at first, he used my ancestral home as collateral to secure a massive $2 million bank loan. I processed the information instantly. The sprawling colonial mansion they lived in had been in my mother's family for 4 entire generations. It was her absolute pride and joy, the very foundation of her entire elite social identity. "You let Thomas leverage your family estate to fund a Ponzi scheme," I stated flatly, absolutely disgusted by the massive revelation. "We did not know it was a bad investment," she sobbed defensively. "But DeAndre just told us that if the local police start investigating him, or if the federal regulators get involved, his primary investors will immediately pull out their capital. The fund will completely collapse by Monday morning. The bank will instantly call in the $2 million loan and they will foreclose on my house. Diana, I will be completely ruined. My wealthy friends at the country club will find out we are secretly bankrupt." The sheer magnitude of her toxic enabling hung heavily in the air. "Let me get this absolutely straight," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You are calling me right now to beg me to ignore the fact that your husband threw your 6-year-old granddaughter into a freezing storm. You want me to let a man who abuses children walk completely free, and you want me to actively cover up federal financial crimes. And you want me to do all of this simply so you do not lose your big house and your fake social status at the local country club." "Yes," she whispered desperately, lacking any shred of moral decency. "Because you are family, Diana. You are supposed to sacrifice for us. Please just come to the dinner on Sunday, sign the non-disclosure paperwork, and apologize to DeAndre. We can fix all of this quietly." I felt a deep, profound disgust that completely eradicated whatever tiny sliver of familial loyalty I had left. They were not a family. They were a parasitic organism feeding on lies and completely willing to sacrifice a child to maintain their illusion of wealth. "I will see you on Sunday, Catherine," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "But you need to start packing your expensive china right now, because I am not sacrificing my daughter for your house." I hung up the phone. And immediately pressed a single button on my secure terminal to establish a heavily encrypted video connection with Attorney Donovan. He appeared on my secondary monitor within seconds, looking exactly as sharp and predatory as he had earlier that morning. "Donovan, we have the missing piece of the financial puzzle," I said smoothly, leaning forward over my desk. My mother just called me in an absolute panic. 2 years ago, Thomas secretly used her ancestral estate as collateral for a $2 million bank loan. He funneled every single penny of that cash directly into DeAndre's hedge fund to act as an anchor investor. Donovan's eyes widened slightly before a predatory smile spread across his face. He began typing rapidly on his mechanical keyboard. "Give me exactly 5 minutes, Diana. I am looping in my lead forensic accountant. If Thomas dumped $2 million into that unregistered Delaware LLC, we can trace exactly where the capital flowed." I watched the screen as Donovan shared his digital workspace. Lines of complex financial code and offshore routing numbers began scrolling rapidly down the monitor. My intelligence training allowed me to read the raw data just as easily as the accountants. We were tracking the massive wire transfer Thomas made 24 months ago. "There it is," Donovan announced, his voice echoing slightly through the encrypted speakers. Thomas wired the $2 million to DeAndre's primary corporate account, but DeAndre never invested it into any experimental technology sector. Look at the immediate outbound transfers. I followed the digital money trail. Within 48 hours of receiving my father's massive investment, DeAndre had authorized dozens of separate wire transfers. He used $500,000 to pay out guaranteed returns to his initial investors, I noted, coldly reading the transaction logs. He was buying their silence and maintaining the absolute illusion of profitability. Classic Ponzi scheme architecture. Donovan confirmed, highlighting another block of transactions. But look at the rest of the capital dispersal. He did not even try to hide his personal embezzlement. He used your father's retirement money to lease 3 luxury vehicles, secure a private membership at an exclusive golf club, and pay for Amber's extravagant wardrobe. The raw financial data painted a pathetic picture of a desperate man trying to buy a high society lifestyle with stolen funds. But something else caught my attention. I pointed to a recurring monthly outbound wire transfer that was bleeding the corporate account dry. Donovan traced those specific recurring payments I instructed. $30,000 every single month going to a holding company in Nevada. That is not a standard business expense. Donovan's fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing several weak corporate firewalls. A few moments later, he let out a low whistle. That Nevada holding company is a known front for an underground lending syndicate operating out of Las Vegas. Diana, your brother-in-law does not just owe money to wealthy suburban investors. He is deeply in debt to extremely dangerous loan sharks, and he is currently defaulting on his massive payments. The entire pathetic mystery surrounding the hospital incident instantly unraveled in my mind. It was never about a minor family discipline issue. It was always about absolute financial desperation. The watch, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. DeAndre claimed Lily stole his $80,000 Patek Philippe. But we saw his son Mason throw it down a storm drain on the Tesla dashcam video. Donovan accessed a separate insurance database using his top-tier legal credentials. He filed a massive loss claim with his premium insurance provider at exactly 6 o'clock this morning. Donovan revealed, pulling up the official claim document. He cited theft by a minor family member. Since it involved a child under the age of criminal liability, he knew the insurance company would likely process the payout quickly, without requiring a deep criminal police investigation. He needed that $80,000 insurance check to stall the loan sharks. I concluded, feeling a wave of absolute disgust wash over me. He actually locked my terrified 6-year-old daughter out in a freezing storm and tried to have her taken away by Child Protective Services simply to construct a fake alibi for insurance fraud. My family had completely sold their souls to protect a fraudulent coward. They were willing to sacrifice my child to maintain their affluent illusion. We have everything we need, Donovan. I stated, my tone entirely devoid of mercy. Compile the forensic accounting logs, the insurance fraud documents, and the Tesla dashcam footage into a single master dossier. Send the financial evidence directly to the SEC Enforcement Division immediately. It is already done, Donovan replied, his eyes gleaming with professional satisfaction. The SEC will freeze all of his assets by tomorrow morning. What about the criminal charges for child abuse and insurance fraud? I will handle the criminal aspect personally, I said, closing the video connection. I had exactly 48 hours until the grand family dinner. I was going to serve them absolute destruction. I disconnected the secure video link with attorney Donovan and went to work on the criminal phase of my operation. The financial ruin of DeAndre was already in motion through federal authorities, but I needed to personally ensure my father faced criminal justice for what he did to my daughter. I opened my encrypted servers and compiled a comprehensive digital and physical dossier. I printed the high-resolution photographs of the severe hand-shaped bruise on Lily's arm, making sure the heavy gold ring indentation was perfectly clear. I attached Dr. Foster's official medical report detailing the life-threatening hypothermia. Next, I downloaded the raw Tesla dashcam footage showing Mason throwing the watch and my father violently dragging Lily into the freezing storm. Finally, I included the insurance claim documents Donovan had uncovered proving DeAndre was actively committing felony fraud. I placed all the physical documents into a thick black leather binder and transferred the video files onto a highly secure encrypted flash drive. Once the package was organized, I picked up my phone and dialed a direct unlisted number for the local police precinct. I bypassed the standard dispatch desk and asked directly for Detective Bennett. Bennett and I went back a long way. Before I launched Aegis Security Solutions, I consulted on several high-profile kidnapping cases for his regional task force. Bennett was a seasoned, uncompromising investigator who despised wealthy individuals using their money to bypass the law. He answered on the second ring, his voice strictly professional. Detective Bennett. I need your immediate attention on a highly sensitive case involving felony child endangerment and massive insurance fraud, I stated, keeping my voice calm and authoritative. I am currently sitting on undeniable video evidence and medical documentation. The perpetrator of the child abuse is my own father, Thomas, and the individual committing the financial fraud is my brother-in-law, DeAndre. Bennett did not hesitate or ask unnecessary questions about family loyalty. Bring everything you have to my precinct right now, Diana, he instructed. I do not care how wealthy your father is. If he laid a hand on a child, he is going to jail. I drove directly to the precinct and met Bennett in his sterile interrogation room. I slid the thick black binder across the metal table and plugged the flash drive into his secure terminal. I stood silently while he reviewed the medical reports and watched the Tesla dashcam video. I saw the muscles in his jaw clench tight as the screen displayed my father shoving my tiny 6-year-old daughter out into the freezing rain and locking the heavy door behind her. Bennett leaned back in his metal chair and let out a long, heavy breath. This is absolutely brutal, Diana, he said, his eyes locked on the frozen frame of my father's face. The medical evidence combined with this video is a guaranteed felony conviction, and the insurance claim DeAndre filed this morning elevates this into a complex financial crime. We can arrest them both immediately. We are not going to arrest them today, I told Bennett, leaning forward and resting my hands flat on the table. My family is hosting a massive formal dinner party this Sunday evening. They invited the entire extended family and several wealthy country club friends. Thomas demanded that I attend this dinner to publicly apologize to DeAndre. He also expects me to sign a legally binding non-disclosure agreement to bury the hospital incident forever, in exchange for my continued access to the family trust. I want you to execute the arrest warrants right in the middle of their perfect high society dinner. A sharp, predatory smile crossed Detective Bennett's face. He understood exactly what I was orchestrating. You want to completely strip away their wealthy facade in front of their entire social circle, he confirmed, tapping his pen against the table. I will need 24 hours to get the arrest warrants officially signed by a judge. We will coordinate a tactical perimeter around your parents' estate on Sunday night. You go inside, play along with their little game, and give me the signal the moment they hand you that non-disclosure agreement. When they present that document, it officially becomes an active attempt to extort a victim of a crime. I shook Bennett's hand and walked out of the police precinct. The guillotine was officially constructed and the blades were perfectly sharpened. I sat in my SUV and pulled out my encrypted phone. I opened my text messages and navigated to my father's contact name. I kept the message incredibly brief and compliant to stroke his massive ego. I will be at the house on Sunday night at 7 o'clock, I typed. Have the non-disclosure agreement ready for me to sign. I hit send and watched the delivery confirmation pop up. The trap was now fully operational. Sunday afternoon arrived with a crisp chill, but inside my secure compound, the atmosphere was warm and entirely focused on my daughter. I had exactly 4 hours before the dinner at my parents' estate began. My absolute priority was ensuring Lily was completely shielded from the fallout. I was sending her to a sleepover at Dr. Foster's house. He and his wife had 2 young daughters around Lily's age, and given that he was the pediatrician who treated her, he completely understood the severe gravity of the situation. He had personally offered his home as a safe haven, and I trusted him implicitly. I knelt on the thick bedroom rug, helping Lily pack her favorite stuffed animals into her small overnight bag. She was still recovering physically, but the resilience of children always amazed me. The dark purple bruise on her arm was fading to a dull yellow under the careful application of prescribed ointments. I brushed her soft hair back from her forehead and kissed her gently. You are going to have so much fun tonight, I told her, keeping my voice light and completely free of the cold fury simmering in my chest. You get to watch movies and eat pizza, while Mommy goes to a boring adult dinner. She smiled and wrapped her small arms tightly around my neck. I love you, Mommy, she whispered. I held her close, closing my eyes for a brief second. I love you too, my brave girl, I replied. I walked her out to the waiting armored SUV where Reynolds, my head of security, was standing by the open door. Reynolds was personally driving her to the Foster's house and conducting a full perimeter check before leaving her there. I watched the vehicle pull away through the heavy iron gates, feeling a massive weight lift off my shoulders. My vulnerability was secured. I walked back into my house and headed straight for my master dressing room. For the past week, my family had repeatedly insulted me, calling me a broken veteran and a pathetic failure. They derived their entire false sense of superiority from their outward appearance. Tonight, I was going to completely strip that away before I even opened my mouth. I was not wearing my dark tactical uniform or my heavy combat boots. I reached into my custom cedar closet and pulled out a bespoke tailored designer suit I reserved exclusively for high-level corporate acquisitions. It was a razor-sharp charcoal gray suit crafted from premium Italian wool. The cut was flawlessly aggressive, emphasizing absolute authority and lethal precision. I paired it with a crisp silk blouse and classic black stilettos that echoed sharply against the hardwood floor. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, tight chignon and applied minimal but striking makeup. I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. I did not look like the traumatized soldier they desperately wanted me to be. I looked exactly like the chief executive officer of a multi-million-dollar security empire. I looked like a woman who could buy and sell their entire pathetic lives before breakfast. I left the dressing room and walked down the hall to my secure command center. I sat at my desk and pulled up the digital overview of my battle plan. The physical dossier was already in Detective Bennett's hands, but the psychological warfare was entirely on my shoulders. I reviewed every single sentence I planned to speak at the dining table. I knew exactly how my father Thomas operated. He would try to dominate the conversation early, using loud, aggressive tones. Amber would inevitably play the victim. DeAndre would try to flash his fake wealth to intimidate me. I mentally rehearsed my countermaneuvers. I would not raise my voice or react to their emotional provocations. I would let them talk themselves into a corner. When they inevitably presented the non-disclosure agreement, I would ask highly specific clarifying questions. I needed them to verbally confirm in front of witnesses that they were explicitly offering me access to the family trust in direct exchange for my silence regarding a felony crime. The moment they confirmed those exact terms, the trap would snap shut, legally constituting criminal extortion. I checked my slim luxury watch. It was 6:15 in the evening. Detective Bennett had already confirmed his tactical units were staging 2 blocks away from my parents' gated community. The arrest warrants were fully signed by a criminal court judge. The federal regulators were actively freezing DeAndre's fraudulent accounts. I stood up from my desk, grabbed my leather clutch, and walked out the front door. The calm before the impending slaughter was now officially over. I pulled my dark SUV up to the massive wrought iron gates of my parents' estate right at 7 o'clock. The sweeping circular driveway was already packed with expensive luxury vehicles belonging to the extended family and various high society friends. I parked my SUV near the front, completely ignoring the designated guest parking area. I stepped out of the vehicle, the cool evening air brushing against my tailored suit. Before heading up the grand brick steps, I quickly checked my encrypted phone. Detective Bennett had sent a single tactical message. Perimeter secured, standing by. I locked my vehicle and walked up to the heavy double doors, swinging them open without bothering to knock. The massive grand foyer was buzzing with polite chatter and the clinking of crystal champagne flutes. The entire extended family was there, the same aunts, uncles, and cousins who had flooded my phone with hateful messages just 2 days ago. The moment I stepped into the room, the conversation died instantly. A heavy, oppressive silence descended as dozens of judgmental eyes turned to stare at me. They clearly expected me to arrive looking defeated, wearing cheap clothes, and carrying the heavy burden of public humiliation. Instead, I stood tall in the center of the foyer, radiating absolute cold authority. I did not break eye contact with anyone. My father Thomas emerged from the formal dining room holding a glass of expensive scotch. He was wearing a custom-tailored blazer, attempting to project the absolute image of a benevolent, wealthy patriarch. "Diana," he announced loudly, his voice echoing perfectly in the quiet room. "You actually decided to show up. I was beginning to think you lacked the basic courage to face this family after the terrible stress you caused everyone this week." I did not offer a polite smile. I walked directly past my staring relatives and followed him into the massive formal dining room. The long mahogany table was set for over 20 guests, adorned with expensive silver and tall lit candles. Amber was already seated near the head of the table, wearing a flowing silk dress, and holding my nephew Mason tightly on her lap, playing the role of the terrified protective mother perfectly. DeAndre sat right next to her, completely failing to hide the anxious sweat forming on his forehead. "Take a seat," Diana Thomas commanded, pointing to a solitary chair positioned directly at the center of the table, completely exposed to everyone. I sat down, placing my leather clutch smoothly next to my pristine water goblet. Thomas did not waste any time with pleasantries. He walked over to a side cabinet and pulled out a thick, stapled legal document, placing it deliberately in the center of the table, right in front of me. He uncapped an expensive fountain pen and laid it carefully on top of the paper. "We are a very forgiving family," Diana Thomas began, projecting his voice so everyone in the adjacent room could hear him clearly. "We understand that your military service left you deeply broken and entirely incapable of rational thought. However, we cannot allow your instability to ruin DeAndre's reputation or tear this family apart any longer." That document is a legally binding non-disclosure agreement drafted by my personal legal team. I looked down at the document, keeping my hands resting perfectly still on the table. "And what exactly does this document require me to do?" "Thomas," I asked, my voice entirely devoid of emotion. Thomas puffed out his chest, leaning heavily over the table to physically intimidate me. "It requires you to immediately retract the completely false police report you filed at the hospital regarding Lily. It legally binds you from ever speaking about the events of that night to anyone. Furthermore, it transfers temporary primary custody of Lily to Catherine and myself. You clearly cannot control her violent outbursts, and she needs proper, wealthy rehabilitation in a stable home environment before she causes any more severe damage to this family." A collective murmur of agreement rippled through the extended family standing in the doorway. My mother, Catherine, stepped forward, wiping a fake tear from her cheek. "It is for your own good, Diana," she whispered dramatically. "You need serious psychiatric help. Let us raise Lily while you go away to a facility and get better." The sheer unmitigated audacity of their demands pushed the tension in the room to an absolute breaking point. They were not just trying to cover up a crime. They were actively attempting to steal my child to maintain their affluent suburban illusion. They wanted to punish me for daring to challenge their authority. And if I refused to sign this absurd document, I asked, looking directly into my father's eyes. Thomas slammed his hand down hard on the mahogany table, rattling the crystal glasses. "If you refuse to sign that paper right now, you are permanently cut off from the family trust. I will formally disinherit you tomorrow morning. I will personally fund DeAndre's legal team to countersue you for defamation, and we will drag your name through the mud until you lose whatever pathetic security job you currently hold. You will be entirely ruined, Diana. The choice is yours. Sign the paper or lose everything." The echo of my father's threat hung heavily in the formal dining room. The crystal glasses on the mahogany table had finally stopped rattling, but the suffocating tension remained pressing down on the shoulders of the wealthy guests who had gathered simply to watch my public execution. Everyone in the room was staring at me, waiting for the inevitable collapse. They expected me to lower my head, reach for the expensive fountain pen, and completely surrender my dignity to save my pathetic financial future. I did not move a single muscle. I kept my eyes locked directly on my father, letting the profound silence stretch until it became physically uncomfortable for everyone else. My complete lack of fear was deeply unsettling to them. I was not playing the role of the terrified victim they had so carefully scripted. Sensing the sudden shift in the psychological balance of the room, DeAndre decided it was his perfect moment to intervene. He stood up from his chair next to Amber, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive suit jacket with exaggerated precision. He walked slowly over to the ornate wooden liquor cabinet positioned against the far wall. The extended family watched him with quiet reverence, treating him like the financial savior of the entire household. He reached for a heavy crystal decanter and poured himself a generous measure of 20-year-old single malt scotch. He took a slow, deliberate sip, closing his eyes to savor the burn before turning back to face me. He walked over to my side of the table, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. He reached inside the breast pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a sleek, leather-bound checkbook. He uncapped his own solid silver pen and began writing, leaning his weight casually against the edge of the table. "Let us just be entirely realistic here, Diana," DeAndre said, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "Your father is offering you a highly generous deal, but I know exactly how much you are struggling. I know the security guard business does not pay well, and raising a child on a single income is incredibly difficult." He tore the heavy paper from the booklet and slid it slowly across the polished wood until it stopped right next to the non-disclosure agreement. I looked down. It was a personal check written out to me for exactly $50,000. "Take it and disappear," Diana DeAndre commanded, taking another long sip of his expensive scotch. "You are a small fish in a very massive ocean. You cannot possibly win this fight against us. Use this money to pay off your mounting debts or put it toward a better apartment for Lily. But you need to sign that paper right now and walk away from this entire situation forever. You do not have the financial resources or the social connections to fight a guy like me. If you force me to unleash my corporate lawyers, they will bury you in endless litigation until you are entirely bankrupt. Take the money, sign the document, and leave my family alone." Amber nodded enthusiastically from the other end of the table, holding Mason tighter against her chest. "DeAndre is being incredibly generous, Diana," she chimed in, her voice echoing with fake sweetness. "You should really thank him for saving you from absolute ruin." I did not look at Amber. I slowly reached out and picked up the $50,000 check. The thick, high-quality paper felt heavy in my fingers. I did not look at my printed name or the large sum written in the center. My highly trained eyes immediately dropped to the bottom left corner of the document. I scanned the 9-digit bank routing number and the specific account number printed in magnetic ink. I committed those exact numbers to memory yesterday morning, sitting in Attorney Donovan's downtown office. It was the primary corporate account for the unregistered Delaware Limited Liability Company. It was the exact fraudulent account he was actively using to run his massive Ponzi scheme. DeAndre was currently attempting to bribe me using the very same stolen funds he had maliciously embezzled from my father's retirement savings. Furthermore, federal regulators from the Securities and Exchange Commission were actively freezing that exact account at this very moment. The piece of paper in my hand was completely worthless. It was drawn on a dead account belonging to a dead hedge fund. I looked up from the fraudulent check and let my eyes lock directly onto DeAndre's arrogant face. I did not scream. I did not throw the money back at him in a fit of rage. Instead, a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. It was a cold, predatory smile that completely unnerved him, causing the smug satisfaction to instantly drain from his eyes. He had absolutely no idea he had just handed me the final piece of physical evidence required to completely destroy his entire life. I held the fraudulent check for another second before letting it slip from my fingers. It fluttered down, landing perfectly on top of the non-disclosure agreement. "I am not signing your extortion document." "Thomas," I stated, my voice cutting through the thick silence of the dining room. "And I am certainly not accepting a fake bribe written from a dead corporate account that federal regulators from the Securities and Exchange Commission officially froze earlier this morning." The color completely drained from DeAndre's face. He staggered backward, bumping into the liquor cabinet as the reality of his massive financial collapse finally hit him. But it was Amber who completely snapped. She had spent her entire life having her tantrums indulged by our parents, and my absolute defiance was simply too much for her fragile, manufactured ego to handle. "You lying, pathetic bitch!" Amber screamed at the top of her lungs, her face contorting with ugly rage. She shoved her heavy dining chair back violently and lunged directly across the wide mahogany table, sending crystal water goblets and expensive silverware crashing to the floor. Her hand was raised high, aiming a vicious open palm slap directly at my face. She was incredibly slow and entirely uncoordinated. My body reacted with deeply ingrained military muscle memory. I did not even blink or flinch. I raised my left hand and effortlessly intercepted her wrist in midair, stopping her strike completely dead. With a swift, calculated twist, I redirected her forward momentum downward, instantly pinning her arm flat against the polished wood of the dining table. I applied a highly precise amount of tactical pressure to a nerve cluster in her wrist, making her gasp loudly in sudden, sharp pain. I did not look at her tear-streaked face. I kept my eyes completely locked on my father Thomas, watching the arrogant confidence completely evaporate from his expression. "Control your daughter, Thomas," I whispered coldly, my voice carrying perfectly in the dead silent room. I released my grip, and Amber scrambled backward, falling clumsily into her chair, clutching her throbbing wrist and sobbing. I smoothed the lapel of my tailored blazer and reached into my pocket, pulling out my encrypted phone. "Since you gathered our entire extended family here tonight to publicly discuss the unfortunate events of the storm, I think it is only fair that everyone gets to see exactly what happened," I announced. I tapped a single sequence into my phone, activating the remote override protocol I had programmed into their home network earlier that day. In the adjacent open-concept living room, the massive 85-inch smart television instantly flared to life. The sudden bright glare drew the immediate attention of every single guest in the house. The high-definition Tesla dashcam footage began to play simultaneously, casting a cold blue light over the horrified faces of my relatives. There was no audio, but the crystal-clear visuals painted an undeniable picture of pure, unadulterated evil. The extended family watched in absolute stunned silence as 7-year-old Mason stormed onto the front porch clutching DeAndre's luxury watch. They clearly saw the boy throw it deliberately down the metal street drain. A collective sharp gasp echoed through the dining room as the narrative Amber had sold them completely unraveled. Then the video showed Thomas stepping out onto the porch. It showed him frantically shoving his precious grandson back inside to protect him. And then the truly horrifying moment played out on the massive screen. The television displayed Thomas violently dragging my tiny 6-year-old daughter by her right arm. It captured him digging his heavy gold ring into her flesh, throwing her forcefully out into the freezing torrential rain, and slamming the heavy door, locking her out in the dark. The camera angle even caught DeAndre standing inside the house, watching the entire abuse happen through the glass sidelight, making absolutely no effort to intervene. The wealthy aunts and uncles who had sent me hundreds of hateful messages just days ago were now staring at the screen in complete shock. My Aunt Patricia covered her mouth with trembling hands. My cousin David looked at Thomas with an expression of pure, unfiltered disgust. The carefully constructed facade of the perfect affluent patriarch was completely eradicated. Catherine let out a piercing shriek from the other end of the table. "Turn it off!" she screamed, waving her hands frantically. "Turn that ridiculous screen off right now, Thomas. Do something!" Thomas finally snapped out of his paralyzed state and scrambled toward the living room, desperately grabbing the television remote from the coffee table. He mashed the power button repeatedly, but the screen remained locked onto my encrypted broadcast, playing the brutal scene on a continuous loop. The remote was completely useless against a military-grade system override. "This is a complete fabrication," Thomas yelled, his voice cracking with pure panic as he turned back to face his horrified guests. "It is a fake video. She altered the footage to make us look bad." I stood up slowly from my chair, picking up my leather clutch. "You cannot gaslight high-definition video, Thomas," I said, my voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. "You left my child to die in the freezing cold to protect a fraudulent coward. And you actually thought you could use your money to force me into silence." The formal dining room instantly erupted into absolute chaos. Several of the wealthy country club guests immediately stood up from the mahogany table, their faces pale with shock and disgust, quickly pushing their heavy wooden chairs back to distance themselves from my family. Aunt Patricia was openly sobbing, her hands still covering her mouth, while Uncle George stared at Thomas with a look of profound betrayal. Amber remained frozen in her chair, clutching her injured wrist, her manufactured tears completely replaced by genuine terror. DeAndre was practically hyperventilating near the liquor cabinet, his eyes darting frantically toward the hallway, as if calculating an escape route. Thomas, however, completely lost his mind. He abandoned the remote control and lunged toward the massive smart television, desperately clawing at the expensive flat screen, trying to find the manual power button. When that failed, he dropped to his knees on the Persian rug, violently yanking the thick power cord directly out of the wall socket. The television finally went black, but the damage was already permanently done. The horrific images of him abusing my 6-year-old daughter were permanently burned into the minds of every single person in the room. He slowly stood up, panting heavily, his tailored blazer completely wrinkled, and his face flushed a dangerous crimson. "You ungrateful, malicious little brat!" Thomas screamed, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. "I gave you absolutely everything. I paid for your childhood, I kept a roof over your head, and this is how you repay me. You doctored a fake video to humiliate me in front of my closest friends and family. I am going to destroy you, Diana. I will tie you up in civil court until you are absolutely penniless." I stood completely still by my chair, my posture perfectly straight and my expression entirely unbothered by his unhinged rant. "You are not going to civil court, Thomas," I replied, my voice dropping to a low, lethal calm that instantly sliced through his screaming. "You are going to criminal court." Right on cue, the heavy mahogany front doors of the estate burst open with a loud, echoing crack. Heavy tactical boots marched decisively across the marble foyer. The wealthy guests gasped and immediately backed away as Detective Bennett strode into the formal dining room, flanked by 4 uniformed police officers. Bennett looked exactly as uncompromising as he did yesterday, his badge gleaming under the crystal chandeliers, and his hand resting casually near his service weapon. The sheer panic that washed over my father's face was absolutely glorious. He stumbled backward, bumping hard against the dark television screen, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound coming out. Thomas Vance Bennett announced, his voice booming with unquestionable authority. "You are under arrest for felony child endangerment and aggravated assault of a minor." My mother, Catherine, let out a piercing, completely unhinged shriek. She threw herself forward, desperately grabbing Bennett's arm. "You cannot do this," she wailed, her expensive jewelry clinking loudly. "He is a prominent member of this community. He knows the mayor. He knows the chief of police. You are making a terrible mistake." Bennett smoothly but firmly detached her hands from his uniform. "Mom, step back immediately, or you will be arrested for interfering with a police investigation." He warned, his tone completely devoid of any sympathy. 2 uniformed officers bypassed my hysterical mother and marched directly toward Thomas. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," an officer commanded, grabbing Thomas by the shoulder and forcibly spinning him around. The metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut echoed sharply through the silent dining room. Thomas looked over his shoulder directly at me, his eyes wide with absolute disbelief. "Diana," he whispered, his voice finally breaking. "Tell them to stop. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Please." I picked up my leather clutch from the table and walked slowly toward him, stopping just inches away from where the officers held him securely. I looked deep into his eyes, finding absolutely no pity in my heart for the man who threw my child into a freezing storm. "I told you I would see you on Sunday." "Thomas," I said, my voice ice cold, "I did not come here tonight to sign your pathetic extortion document. I came here to keep you busy while the district attorney signed your felony arrest warrant. Enjoy your new jewelry." The officers forcefully marched Thomas out of the dining room, his head bowed in absolute humiliation in front of the very people he spent his entire life trying to impress. Catherine collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably into the expensive Persian rug. But the operation was not entirely finished yet. I turned slowly on my heels and locked my eyes directly onto DeAndre, who was quietly attempting to slip out the back sliding glass doors. While everyone was captivated by my father's spectacular downfall, DeAndre had silently retreated toward the back of the room. He was reaching for the brass handle of the heavy sliding glass doors that led out to the manicured patio. He was trying to slip away into the dark night like the coward he truly was. He desperately thought that because he did not physically drag my daughter into the storm, he was somehow exempt from the legal slaughter I had orchestrated tonight. He managed to slide the heavy glass door open just a few inches. The cool evening breeze swept into the stifling dining room, providing a brief moment of false hope. But before he could step outside, a massive hand slammed flat against the glass from the outside, violently shoving the door shut with a loud crack. Detective Bennett stepped out from the dark shadows of the patio. He pulled the door open from the outside and stepped into the dining room, completely blocking DeAndre's only escape route. Two more uniformed officers immediately flanked him, cutting off any lateral movement. "Where exactly are you going?" DeAndre Bennett asked, his voice dripping with absolute authority. "The evening is just getting started and you are a vital part of this ongoing investigation." DeAndre took a staggering step backward, his hands instinctively coming up in a defensive posture. "Look, I have absolutely nothing to do with what Thomas did to the kid." DeAndre stammered, his voice cracking with pure panic. "You all saw the video. I was just standing inside the house. I did not lay a single finger on Lily. You cannot arrest me for just standing there. I want to call my lawyer right now." I walked slowly across the dining room, my heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor until I was standing directly in front of him. I looked at the sweat dripping profusely down his forehead, completely ruining his expensive tailored look. The wealthy guests watched us in absolute stunned silence. "You are absolutely right, DeAndre," I said, keeping my tone perfectly even and terrifyingly calm. "You did not physically touch my daughter. But your catastrophic failure to intervene is not why Detective Bennett is standing in front of you right now. You are not going to jail for child abuse. You are going to jail for sheer, unadulterated greed." He blinked rapidly, utter confusion warring with his rising terror. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his chest heaving. I reached into my sleek leather clutch and pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper. I opened it slowly and held it up for him to clearly see. It was a printed copy of the official police report and the subsequent insurance claim he had filed at 6:00 that very morning. "You claim that an $80,000 Patek Philippe watch was stolen from your possession," I stated, reading directly from the document. "You explicitly named my 6-year-old daughter as the primary suspect in this official police report. You then immediately forwarded this exact police report to your premium insurance provider to initiate a massive cash payout claim. You thought blaming a minor would secure a quick check to hold off the dangerous loan sharks you owe money to in Nevada." DeAndre's jaw dropped, his eyes darting frantically between the paper in my hand and Bennett's stern face. "But there is a massive fatal flaw in your arrogant little plan," I continued, my voice carrying clearly to every remaining guest. "You just watched the high-definition Tesla dashcam video, along with everyone else here. We all saw your son Mason deliberately throw that watch down the metal storm drain. Detective Bennett currently has a certified copy of that video in his possession. The Federal Insurance Fraud Bureau also received a copy of that video from my corporate attorney exactly 2 hours ago." I took a deliberate step closer, completely invading his personal space. "Filing a false police report is a serious crime, DeAndre," I whispered. "But using that false report to execute a fraudulent $80,000 insurance claim across state lines elevates your pathetic lie to a federal felony." Detective Bennett stepped forward, pulling a heavy set of steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. "DeAndre, you are under arrest for filing a false police report and felony insurance fraud," Bennett announced. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back immediately." DeAndre did not fight. His legs completely gave out beneath him. He collapsed onto his knees on the hardwood floor, letting out a pathetic sob of pure defeat. The officers hauled him roughly to his feet and snapped the cold steel cuffs securely around his wrists. From the other side of the room, Amber let out a blood-curdling scream. "DeAndre," she shrieked, scrambling up from her chair. "You cannot take him. He is a highly successful hedge fund manager. I turned to look at my older sister, watching her desperately cling to an officer as they dragged her husband away. She had absolutely no idea her nightmare was only just beginning. Amber continued to shriek, clawing desperately at the sleeve of the uniformed officer who was holding her husband. DeAndre let her pull at the fabric for a moment before he suddenly straightened his posture, trying to salvage one final shred of his shattered ego. He shook his head violently, shaking off the initial shock of the steel handcuffs biting into his wrists. The wealthy guests were still watching, and his narcissistic brain simply could not process the reality of his complete public destruction. Amber, stop crying. DeAndre snapped loudly, his voice echoing in the grand foyer as the officers began to physically march him out of the formal dining room. Let them do this. Let them make this massive illegal mistake. You call Harrison and Vance right now. Tell my lead corporate attorneys to get down to the precinct immediately. I am a multi-millionaire hedge fund manager. I have more money and legal power than this entire local police department combined. They will have me out on bail in less than an hour. And when I get out, Diana, I am going to completely destroy your pathetic life. I am going to sue you for everything you own and take your daughter away just for spite. I stood perfectly still in the center of the dining room, listening to his delusional threats. I slowly raised my left arm, pushing back the cuff of my tailored blazer to look at my slim luxury watch. It was exactly 7:45 in the evening. I highly doubt Harrison and Vance will be answering your phone calls tonight. DeAndre, I said, my voice carrying clearly down the wide hallway, stopping him dead in his tracks. The officers paused, allowing him to turn his head and look back at me. What are you talking about? He demanded, his face twisting into a furious sneer. I am talking about the massive coordinated federal raid currently taking place at your sleek downtown corporate office, I replied smoothly, taking a slow, measured step toward him in the hallway. You see, DeAndre, while I was busy handing your fake insurance claim over to Detective Bennett, my corporate attorney was busy handing your deeply fraudulent financial records over to the federal authorities. I watched his chest stop moving entirely. He forgot how to breathe. We ran a complete forensic accounting sweep on your unregistered Delaware limited liability company. I continued, speaking with absolute lethal precision. We traced the $2 million Thomas secretly gave you using my mother's ancestral home as collateral. We proved you never invested a single dime of that capital. We tracked the monthly wire transfers you sent to the underground lending syndicate in Nevada to pay off your dangerous loan sharks. We handed the Securities and Exchange Commission undeniable proof that you are operating a massive illegal Ponzi scheme. A collective gasp swept through the wealthy guests still huddled in the dining room. Several of the country club executives who had likely invested their own money with DeAndre immediately pulled out their cell phones, their faces turning completely pale with sudden financial terror. One of my uncles started shouting, demanding to know where his retirement savings went, but Bennett completely ignored him. Your corporate attorneys are not coming to bail you out, DeAndre, I stated coldly, standing just a few feet away from him in the grand hallway. Their offices are currently being raided by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They are seizing your servers, your hard drives, and every piece of paper in your building. Every single bank account connected to your name, your fake hedge fund, and your offshore shell companies was officially frozen by the federal government over an hour ago. You have absolutely no money left. You have no fund. You have no powerful legal team. Amber stood completely frozen, her mouth hanging open as she looked back and forth between me and her husband. Her designer dress suddenly looked incredibly ridiculous on a woman who was about to lose everything she owned. DeAndre. Tell me she is lying. Amber whispered, her voice barely audible over the sudden frantic whispering of the panicked guests. Tell me our money is safe. Tell me we are not bankrupt. DeAndre could not look at his wife. He stared directly at me, his arrogant facade completely dissolving into pure, unadulterated horror. He finally realized that he was not just facing a few months in a minimum security facility for a fake insurance claim. He was facing decades in a maximum security federal penitentiary for massive wire fraud, money laundering, and running an illegal Ponzi scheme across state lines. The dangerous loan sharks he owed money to in Las Vegas would realize he was officially bankrupt by tomorrow morning, and they would absolutely come looking for their missing capital. He had absolutely nothing left to hide behind. The complete catastrophic weight of his permanent destruction crashed down onto his shoulders all at once, stripping away every single lie he had ever told. DeAndre's knees instantly buckled beneath him. He physically collapsed onto the expensive imported marble floor of the grand hallway, the heavy steel handcuffs clinking sharply against the polished stone. He did not yell or try to threaten me anymore. He did not demand his lawyers or try to assert his fake dominance. He just curled his body forward and began to cry. It was not a dignified cry. It was a loud, pathetic, hysterical sobbing sound that echoed off the high ceilings of my parents' estate, filling the dead silence of the room. Detective Bennett looked down at the completely broken man sobbing on the floor with a look of utter professional disgust. "Get him up and get him out of my sight," Bennett instructed the two officers. They grabbed DeAndre by the lapels of his expensive, outdated suit jacket, hauling him roughly to his feet, and dragging his limp, crying body out the heavy mahogany front doors and into the flashing red and blue lights of the waiting police cruisers. The heavy mahogany front doors slammed shut behind DeAndre, cutting off the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers. The grand foyer of my parents' estate fell into a suffocating, absolute silence. The only sound remaining was the steady rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock standing in the corner, and the muffled, pathetic sobs of my mother, Catherine, who was still crumpled on the Persian rug. The wealthy country club guests and the extended family members were completely paralyzed, standing shoulder to shoulder in the dining room, watching their pristine social hierarchy disintegrate into ash. Amber stood completely alone in the center of the hallway. She stared at the closed front doors for a long, agonizing moment. Then her deeply ingrained narcissistic survival instincts violently kicked in. She whipped her head around her tear-streaked face, instantly contorting into a mask of complete, exaggerated outrage. "I had absolutely no idea," she shrieked, throwing her hands up in the air and looking frantically at the gathered guests. "I am a victim here. DeAndre lied to me. He told me the tech investments were skyrocketing. I never looked at the banking statements. He completely manipulated me just like he manipulated all of you. I am a victim of severe financial abuse, and I demand that someone call my lawyer immediately." She looked desperately toward our Uncle George, who was a prominent real estate developer. "George, please, you have to help me," Amber pleaded, taking a step toward him. "You know I would never steal from this family. You know I am just a dedicated mother trying to raise Mason. I knew absolutely nothing about any Ponzi scheme." Uncle George took a deliberate physical step backward, crossing his arms defensively and refusing to meet her eyes. Nobody in the room moved to comfort her. I watched her pathetic theatrical performance with pure analytical detachment. She was perfectly willing to throw her husband under a moving bus the exact second he became a liability to her lifestyle. I slowly reached into my leather clutch for the final time tonight. "You are an incredibly terrible actress, Amber," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy air and instantly drawing every single eye in the room back to me. "You might be able to fool these terrified country club members with your fake tears, but you cannot fool federal forensic accountants." I pulled out a thick, stapled stack of financial transcripts. They were printed on heavy bonded paper, bearing the official watermark of Attorney Donovan's corporate legal firm. I held the documents up, letting the crystal chandelier light illuminate the crisp black text. "When my team dismantled DeAndre's unregistered Delaware limited liability company, we did not just find his personal embezzlement," I stated loudly, walking slowly back into the dining room so everyone could hear the absolute truth. "We found the secondary offshore accounts he established in the Cayman Islands to hide the capital he was stealing from his early investors." Amber froze, her fake sobbing instantly halting. She stared at the documents in my hand, her eyes widening in pure absolute terror. In order to establish those specific offshore shell companies, DeAndre required a secondary corporate officer to sign the federal tax evasion documents. I continued flipping to the second page of the transcript. My forensic accountants recovered the digital signatures, the encrypted notary stamps, and the specific IP addresses used to authorize those massive illegal wire transfers. I took a deliberate step toward my sister, forcing her to look directly at the undeniable proof of her crimes. Your digital signature is on every single offshore transfer, Amber. Your personal secure banking token was used to funnel over $800,000 of stolen investor capital into private accounts completely hidden from the United States government. You are not a naive victim. You are a fully documented legal accomplice to federal wire fraud and massive international money laundering. You are lying! Amber gasped, her voice dropping to a terrified, desperate whisper. She backed away from me, her designer heels stumbling awkwardly on the hardwood floor. You forged those documents, Diana. You hacked my computer and planted those signatures to frame me because you have always been jealous of me. I did not bother to argue with her ridiculous delusion. I just smiled a cold, completely hollow expression. The Federal Bureau of Investigation does not care about your pathetic sibling rivalry, Amber. They already possess these exact transcripts. They will be at your house by tomorrow morning with federal warrants. The remaining color drained entirely from Amber's face. The reality of a federal prison sentence finally penetrated her thick wall of arrogance. She looked around the room, realizing every single relative and friend had completely abandoned her. She was entirely trapped. She suddenly fell to her knees, her designer dress pooling awkwardly around her on the floor. She looked up at me, tears of genuine, panicked desperation streaming down her face. "Diana, please!" she begged, her voice cracking into a pathetic whine. "Please, you have a multi-million-dollar security company. You have elite lawyers. I need a massive defense team right now. I have Mason to think about. He needs his mother. You cannot let your own sister go to federal prison. Please, Diana, I need you to loan me the money to hire a legal defense team. I will do whatever you want. I will sign anything. Just please give me the money." I looked down at the golden child of the family, the sister who had spent her entire life mocking me, belittling my military service, and trying to destroy my daughter to cover up her own toxic failures. She was finally on her knees exactly where she belonged. I slowly placed the financial transcripts down onto the mahogany dining table, right next to the fraudulent $50,000 check and the unsigned non-disclosure agreement. "I am not giving you a single dime, Amber," I replied, my voice perfectly calm and completely devoid of mercy. "If you need money for a federal defense attorney, I suggest you use the family trust." My mother, Catherine, remained crumpled on the Persian rug, her sobbing now transformed into a high-pitched rhythmic wail of pure misery. As I stood over the final remnants of their shattered empire, she slowly pushed herself up, using the mahogany dining chair for support. Her perfectly styled hair was a disheveled mess, and her face was blotchy with uncontrolled rage. She glared at me with eyes full of pure hatred, ignoring the ruined husband and daughter who had just been dragged out of the house in handcuffs. "You are a monster, Diana!" Catherine screamed, pointing a trembling finger at my chest. "You came into this house with your military training and your cold, calculating heart, and you systematically destroyed everything we built. You are not a daughter, you are a demon. I do not care how much money you have or what credentials you pretend to hold. You have absolutely no right to be here. Get out of my house right now. Get out of our sight before I call the police and have you dragged out like the criminal you are." I did not move. I did not flinch. I let her vitriol wash over me like water off a tactical rain jacket. I watched her struggle to maintain her composure while the remnants of our extended family watched in paralyzed horror. They were all waiting to see if I would finally break, or if I would finally show a shred of that familial sentiment she was weaponizing. I waited until her screaming subsided into ragged, gasping breaths. Then I reached into my clutch one last time and produced a single heavy legal document. It was not a smear campaign file. It was not a record of their financial crimes. It was a property deed transfer finalized through the municipal county clerk less than an hour ago. "I think you are confused about who actually owns this house, Catherine," I said, my voice remarkably steady and calm. "You keep saying your house. You keep saying your ancestral estate. But your husband Thomas was not quite as successful as he wanted you to believe. He was not just a wealthy patriarch. He was a man drowning in debt." I stepped toward her, letting the document hang loosely in my hand. 2 years ago, When Thomas used this home as collateral for that $2 million loan to fund DeAndre's Ponzi scheme, he signed a very specific agreement. It was a standard commercial debt instrument. When DeAndre's fund collapsed this morning, the primary banking institution immediately declared the loan in total default. They had no interest in managing a sprawling residential estate. They wanted the debt off their books immediately. I watched her face as the implication finally began to sink in. Her eyes darted to the legal document, and then back to my face, her breathing hitching in her throat. My private investment firm, Aegis Security Solutions, operates a capital management arm. I continued, my tone matter of fact. We specialize in acquiring distressed assets. When the bank put the debt for this specific property up for emergency auction today, I placed the winning bid. I did not just buy the mortgage, Catherine. I bought the entire debt. I am now the primary lien holder of this property. Because Thomas defaulted on the payments, the title has legally transferred to my holding company. I held the document out toward her. She refused to take it, so I let it drop gently onto the Persian rug at her feet. You are currently standing in the foyer of a house that belongs to my company. I said, my voice dropping to a finality that made the silence in the room absolute. You have exactly 30 days to vacate my property. The room erupted into a fresh round of gasps, but I did not turn to look at the guests. I looked only at Catherine. The woman who had spent my entire childhood demanding I meet impossible standards of perfection was now staring at me in total shell-shocked silence. The loss of the mansion was the ultimate checkmate. It was the only thing she truly valued. I adjusted my blazer, feeling the sharp, clean lines of the Italian wool against my shoulders. I have arranged for a moving crew to arrive on the 1st of next month. To begin the inventory process, I added casually, as if I were discussing a routine business logistics update. Please ensure that all personal belongings are cleared by then. Anything remaining on the premises will be considered abandoned property and will be disposed of accordingly. I turned toward the grand mahogany front doors, my heels echoing against the marble floors. I did not look back at the broken remains of my family. I had successfully dismantled their house of cards, removed the immediate threat to my daughter, and ensured that every single person responsible for that night of horror would face the full weight of the justice system. I stepped out into the night air, letting the heavy doors close behind me with a final decisive click. My war was over. My daughter was safe. And for the first time in my life, I was finally entirely free. The calendar turned quickly, and with it the facade of the high society I had once been forced to inhabit crumbled into dust. A few months of legal proceedings were all it took to dismantle decades of carefully constructed lies. I sat in my office at Aegis Security Solutions, looking over the final summaries provided by Attorney Donovan, feeling nothing but a cool, detached sense of completion. The courtroom had been the final battlefield, and the results were as comprehensive as I had calculated. Thomas, once the man who believed his golf buddies and trust funds made him immune to the law, stood in the dock for his sentencing. He looked a decade older, his skin sallow, and his once impeccable tailoring replaced by a dull prison jumpsuit. The jury had not deliberated long. He was convicted on every count of felony child endangerment. The court stripped him of his country club memberships, his professional licenses, and his entire retirement pension. He had spent his final years as a pillar of the community, only to be escorted out of the courtroom in silence, headed to a state facility where status meant absolutely nothing. The social elite he had worshipped were the first to wipe his name from their guest lists the moment the news broke. DeAndre fared significantly worse under the scrutiny of federal prosecutors. The sheer volume of evidence regarding the Ponzi scheme and the insurance fraud meant he had no leverage and no defense. The judge handed down a 15-year sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary, emphasizing the cruelty of using his own family's stolen retirement savings as a slush fund. When the gavel fell, he didn't even look back at the gallery. He had gambled with dangerous men, exploited the people who trusted him, and ultimately lost his freedom in the pursuit of a lifestyle he could never afford. He was now just a number in a system designed to house the people he thought he was better than. Amber, meanwhile, found herself in the middle of a nightmare of her own making. The FBI investigation into the offshore accounts had expanded rapidly. Once she realized she was not going to be protected by her husband's non-existent fortune, she had attempted to flip on him to save herself, but the evidence of her digital signatures was too damning to ignore. She filed for personal bankruptcy, the legal fees alone consuming the last of her designer collection. Her social media profiles were wiped clean, a ghost of the life she once flaunted. She spent her days being grilled by federal agents, facing the very real possibility of her own prison time, while struggling to explain her actions to her young son, who had been placed under the temporary guardianship of her ex-in-laws. The irony was palpable. She had fought so hard to keep her status that she ended up with none. Catherine, the woman who had once hosted galas in the sprawling mansion that had defined her existence, was the most pathetic of them all. The 30-day deadline had come and gone without a single extension. I had overseen the inventory process personally, ensuring that every asset belonging to the house was handled with cold, mechanical efficiency. She was now living in a tiny one-bedroom rental apartment on the outskirts of the city, a space that was little more than a box compared to the rooms she had once filled with her performative vanity. I heard through the grapevine that she spent her time complaining to anyone who would listen about her daughter, the monster. She had lost her home, her social standing, and her family, yet she still could not grasp that her own greed and silence were the catalyst for her ruin. For me, the aftermath was not a celebration, but a reclamation of peace. Lily was thriving. The Fosters had become our closest allies, and my daughter was once again the vibrant, happy child she was always meant to be. The shadows of the past did not haunt our house. They were locked away in files and court transcripts that I rarely felt the need to reference. My security firm continued to grow, earning a reputation for being the absolute best in the industry, and my clients knew that if they hired Aegis, they were getting the most disciplined, accurate, and lethal intelligence in the field. I finished reading the summary and closed the folder, setting it aside on my desk. The silence in my office was no longer heavy or oppressive. It was the silence of a job done correctly, the quiet of a life reclaimed. I looked at the photograph of Lily on my desk, her smile bright and unburdened by the memory of the storm. I had set out to protect her, to dismantle the toxicity that had tried to claim her future. And I had succeeded. The debt was paid, the accounts were settled, and for the first time in my life, I was not defined by the expectations of people who didn't deserve my loyalty. I stood up, walked to the window, and watched the city traffic move below, completely at peace with the path I had carved. The war was over, and I had won on every front. The sunlight poured into my home office in soft golden ribbons, a stark contrast to the harsh, sterile lighting of the courtroom that had defined my family's final months. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the manicured expanse of my backyard. Below, the grass was vibrant, untainted by the shadows of my past. Lily was running across the lawn, her laughter drifting up to me clear and unburdened. She was playing tag with Dr. Foster's children, their small figures moving with the carefree joy that every child deserves, but that my family had tried so hard to steal from her. Watching them, I realized that I had finally achieved the objective I set for myself on that night in the hospital. I had not just removed a threat, I had cultivated a sanctuary. For years, I had labored under the delusion that family was an obligation of blood, a web of toxic expectations that I had to navigate to be considered whole. I had been wrong. True family is not defined by shared DNA or the hollow performance of holiday dinners. It is built on the bedrock of mutual respect, unyielding protection, and the silent, constant knowledge that you are safe in the hands of those you love. I had finally found that not in the ancestral home that was just wood and stone, but in the people I had chosen to let into our lives. The power I possessed, the power that had dismantled a facade of generational wealth and influence, was not rooted in the millions in my bank accounts or the lethal precision of my firm. It was rooted in the absolute willingness to let go. I had been terrified of losing the approval of people who didn't respect me, fearing the void their absence would create. I discovered that the void was actually a blank canvas. When you surgically remove the rot of narcissism and deceit from your life, you aren't left with less. You are left with the space for true life to finally take root. I watched Lily stumble over a patch of clover tumble and then immediately scramble back up, fueled by the resilience that had defined her entire young life. She was a survivor and she was mine. I had taught her through the quiet strength of my own actions that boundaries are not acts of cruelty, but acts of love. By cutting out the toxic influences that had tried to strangle our growth, I had allowed us to bloom in the light of our own making. There was no bitterness left in me, only a profound, grounded clarity. The people who had tried to dictate my worth were now footnotes in a legal record irrelevant to the reality of my daily life. The world outside my gate remained chaotic and full of threats, but inside there was order. My firm continued its work, and my reputation remained untarnished, but those were secondary to the scene below. I had traded the heavy, suffocating expectations of a lineage for the light, airy freedom of autonomy. I had burned down the fortress they had built for me, and in the ashes, I had planted a garden. It was a simple, brutal, and beautiful truth: you cannot heal a garden if you refuse to prune the dead branches. The rot had to go so the life could endure. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass of the window, taking a long, steady breath. The air felt thin and clean. The weight that had settled in my chest the day I left for the military so many years ago had finally completely evaporated. I was no longer the daughter fighting for a seat at their table. I was the architect of my own table, and it was a place where only those who earned their keep and valued the dignity of others were allowed to sit. I turned away from the window, leaving the brightness of the garden behind, and walked back to my desk. There were new contracts to review and new challenges to overcome, but they were mine to choose. The story they tried to write for me had ended in a courtroom. The story I was writing for myself had only just begun. I sat down, opened a fresh document, and started to work, leaving the past exactly where it belonged, in the dark, silent history I had long since outgrown. The screen was bright, the room was quiet, and for the first time, the future was entirely, mercifully mine. This story illustrates that true power is not found in maintaining a facade of status, but in the courageous act of setting firm boundaries. Diana's journey teaches us that removing toxic people from our lives is not an act of malice. It is a necessary pruning to allow our own potential to bloom. We often fear that cutting off family will leave us empty, but it actually creates the space for authentic respect and safety to thrive. Protecting your peace is the highest form of self-love. If you have ever had to walk away to protect your own growth, tell us your story in the comments below.